said, wow, what they're doing there for food entrepreneurs is fantastic. We want to be able to do the same thing for wood products entrepreneurs. And so that was kind of the inspiration. And heck, if you just look at it there, all you got to do is change one letter, and it's a Wood Innovation Center. So kidding aside, that's really been our focus, is working with the entrepreneurs and helping them take product to market. And so as quick background, the Wood Innovation Center at OSU was established in January of 2006, so just a little over 14 years ago. It is part of the OSU Extension Service, and I suspect some of you may be familiar with that, but maybe many others may not be. When you work at a university, most people ask you what do you teach, or what is your research focus? And for land grant institutions like OSU is for Oregon, we have a third mission, and that's called extension or outreach. And so the vast majority of my job is actually technical assistance to wood products businesses. And as you can see here, our target audience is wood products firms, as well as industry groups, communities, and even the general public. And just as one final point here on what the Wood Innovation Center is about, our mission is improving the competitiveness of Oregon's wood products industry by fostering innovation in products, processes, and business systems. So processes, business systems, we're mostly focused on the product side. Excuse me. And so again, talk about what the Wood Innovation Center does. To put it simply, we do outreach. We are industry's front door to OSU's Department of Wood Science and Engineering. We're often the first place that people will come when they have a question about something, whether it's something as simple as how do we improve the product performance with something that's, and some product may be failing in the field, or they're trying to develop a new product. And so if you see our byline here is connecting people, ideas, and resources. We try to bring people together. Many times entrepreneurs with a new idea, all they really need is a source of raw materials, for example, or somebody to do machining for them, or somebody to help them take the product to market in a distribution channel or something like that. So we play a key role in this idea of connecting people, ideas, and resources. Our primary activities are technical assistance, contract testing services of products. We conduct workshops, write publications, provide experiential learning for students. So many of the students that are in the wood science program will provide assistance to me on occasion, doing some product testing or things like that. What specifically do we do? And again, so this is a good place to bring in an example. Let's use this, as Chuck and I talked last week, said this what we've done with Western Juniper would be a good case example. Valley Ponderosa pine. So let's set the stage here a little bit first here. So Western Juniper is a species, a tree species native to the high desert of Eastern Oregon, Northeast California, and to a limited extent, Southwest Idaho and Northwest Nevada as well. If you look on the map there on your screen, you see that the green shows the subspecies Occidentalis, which is the main species we've worked with. There's another, it's a Western Juniper species, but it's a slightly different species, and in the red that goes down onto the east side of the Sierras into all the way down into Central and Southern California and scattered around Nevada as well. The big issue with juniper, though, is this dramatic expansion. If you see here, in 1930 is about 1.5 million acres of the species, and then with cattle grazing, fire suppression, and European settlement of the Western U.S. by the 2005, that had gone from 1.5 million acres to 6.5 million acres. So if you look at the photo here, this is taken near Prineville in Central Oregon 130 years ago. And now if you look at that same location, still roughly 1990, so quite a few years ago, and you could see just this, that's the same hillside with the juniper. As Smoky Bear has done a lot of good things for the forest, but one thing we're not quite so sure about is this increase in the fuel that's out on the landscape. So here's all the Western, most of the trees you see on that hillside were Western juniper in 1890 and are still Western juniper in 1989. The big issue, though, is, hey, an increase in forest is great, right? Problem is this is out in the eastern desert, and so there's very little precipitation in already. So the more trees we have there, the more erosion we wind up getting, and the more Uh, non-native plants come in as well. Wildlife habitats altered. So the bottom line is that the people that own these lands, both public and private, really want to see the juniper rangeland restored and the population greatly reduced. But there's some challenges to that. First, to kind of set the stage a little bit, whenever we're talking about working with a lesser known species, we always have to start from the standpoint of the manufacturers. And as we go out to manufacturers and talk to them about whether it's Willamette Valley ponderosa pine, western juniper, and some of Oregon's native hardwoods, they want to know how much timber volume is there. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about a few isolated trees? Are we talking about vast acreages out in Eastern Oregon? How much timber volume is there? And what do we know about its quality? What are the shape of these stems? Are they highly tapered? Do they have big limbs? How tall do they get? What kind of log grade? Sort of lengths, log lengths can we get? What sort of tree diameter again? And how accessible is it? This is both in terms of physically accessible. Are there roads where these forests are so that we could actually harvest trees and get them out of there? Or is it legislatively restricted from harvest, like in national parks and wilderness areas where the timber harvesting is off limits? So there's no point in talking about marketing a species if you know you really can't log the timber anyway. And these here are really all about cost, as you can imagine. So they're wanting to know, what are we looking at in terms of cost of accessing this timber? And then the other big thing, and often where I get involved, is when they ask me, they say, well, what's the, like, here's western juniper or ponderosa pine, whatever it is. What's the species like? Is it similar to other pines? Is it similar to cedar? Is it similar to walnut or oak? And so we're talking there about mechanical and physical properties and how they may vary. As you'll see here in a map I'll show you later, but ponderosa pine grows from interior British Columbia all the way down into central Mexico. Its properties change, as you can imagine, based on where it grows. So how much do they change, and how much does that change what we can do with them? And then we're always looking for these niches as well. Is there anything unique about this species? Is it durable? Is it aromatic? What's the story behind it? Are these private woodlands where we're helping out a small family business by harvesting this timber? Are we helping out a rancher in Eastern Oregon that needs to restore stream flows on their property? Again, well, what's kind of the story behind the species? Is there anything interesting there that we could market for that? So now kind of back to juniper. What are the challenges with juniper? Why not just treat it like any other species? Well, those of you who are paying attention will notice here that I'm talking about juniper, but the image you see on the upper right there is a Douglas fir stand. Douglas fir is the state tree of Oregon. It's the one that appears on many of our license plates. And this is kind of what the timber industry likes to think of when they think of timber. They think of, oh, if you notice that one straight stem, very tall, very few limbs, very advantageous species in many ways. What are the challenges with juniper? If you keep that image in your mind of what a Douglas fir stand looks like, this is more like western juniper here. They're much smaller, shrubbier trees, not nearly as tall. Limbs often go all the way to the ground. If you see the shape of those logs on the tree, they have what's called fluted bark, and so areas where the tree is actually kind of wrapped around itself and the bark goes well into the tree. Bottom line is, from the standpoint of cost, and this is back to that, what's the wood like? What's the stand like? Well, you get very high harvest costs and very low lumber yield. So we really need to look for something unique from this species. And one of the big issues we've tackled at the Wood Innovation Center is on the species properties. Because so little was known about the species, when we tried to talk to manufacturers about taking this to market, particularly engineers, they would say, well, if you don't know anything about the species, we're reluctant to take a risk on using it for anything that requires strength properties, for example. And so to fast forward here, here's a grad student in our program, Byron Miyamoto. He did his master's project here on testing the mechanical and physical properties of western juniper. So here's some couple of 4x4 there in the upper left where he's cutting it into these sample specimens, and then on the lower right, that's Byron doing the bending tests. And so what's the importance of that? Well, thanks to his work and his master's thesis and going through the proper channels, I don't expect you to know any of these numbers. That's not the important thing, is to know that they now exist. They did not exist before. And so now, if you're an engineer looking to design, say, a log cabin or a deck for someone or anything that requires engineering values, the values for Western juniper are now available and published. And just having that information available can go a long ways to opening market opportunities. And so just to give you some more behind the story, you can go to the westernjuniper.org website. Here you can see here, this is actually maintained by Sustainable Northwest out of Portland. And they'll give you an idea here of the story behind it. They talk about it's naturally enduring, it's naturally decay resistant. It's a very distinctive species, it's aromatic, all those things. And then you can, of course, click through their website to find out all the different things that people now are doing with the species. So raised bed gardens, pergolas, gazebos, decking, even interior products like bathroom cabinets, wall, ceiling panels, and kitchen cabinets and things like that. So next step here, what are we going to do? So nothing we do here seems to ever be a one-off. It's always say, that's great. Now we can find uses for the structural material. But if you look at the shape of these trees again, here it is propped up on a little sawmill about to be sawn up. Really what you're going to get out of that log is about a 6x8 here, and the rest is going to be waste material. So what do we do with these vast quantities? This is mostly just firewood right now. So what do we do with all the residues? Right now, we're working on a project to make strand board out of them. So those are Western juniper strands. Adhesive's been applied to them. They're pressed into a panel. I saw these panels, and thankfully one of my coworkers, I looked at it and said, I guess that's all right. It doesn't say much to me. And he had the insight as a custom woodworker. He said, I bet if we sanded that, that would look really cool. And I just thought it would look smoother and ugly. But this is what it looks like sanded. So it actually is a pretty unique looking product. And we're thinking that it's going to be more of an appearance grade thing than it will be an architectural or structural product. So that's Western juniper strand board after sanding. And again, if you're paying attention here, you see that doesn't say juniper, that says Douglas fir. But we're not there yet. But here's a product. Here's a company that is Formology in Portland, just one example of companies we've worked with. They're making this kind of a product, decorative panels, wall panels out of Douglas fir, waste material. They can do the same thing with Western juniper, and so they and others may get into that. So with that, that's the kind of the background on the Wood Innovation Center and what we do with the juniper as a case example of a lesser known species effort. Let's shift gears a little bit now and talk about ponderosa pine. What do we know about this species? Where does it grow? How is it used now? And based on that, what are some new opportunities? So just starting here with where does it grow, as I mentioned before, you can see the range for ponderosa pine is much, much larger than it is for Western juniper. Ponderosa pine, again, grows from interior British Columbia all the way down into central Mexico. It's out in southwest South Dakota and the Black Hills. It's in west Nebraska. I mean, again, it really covers the range in the Rocky Mountains and the Cascades, and then down into California, Southwest Oregon, and so forth. So anytime a species has that kind of a wide range, you can expect the wood properties to be pretty variable as well. I've been in furniture plants in Mexico and seen some of their ponderosa pine, and I didn't even recognize it. It looks so different than what we have here. But of course, you're focused on, and if you notice here, this little bubble right here in the Willamette Valley of Oregon is actually pretty unique, and it's a bit broken and isolated from the other. Most of these others are contiguous in some way. There are gaps in here and there, and the spread through the desert down into Mexico. But the fact that most of the time this is grown in a dry climate, and the fact that it's grown in the wet Willamette Valley led us to think there's probably going to be some different properties there than the ponderosa pine we're used to using from Southwest Oregon, Eastern Oregon, Northeast California, and so forth. So let's talk about how it's used now. As college students, you probably recognize that fancy shelving unit there on the left. That was the bulk of my shelving as a college student. some cinder blocks and some pine boards, and that's really pine commons, they call those common pine boards used for shelving, fascia on houses. It's painted, it's not in contact with the ground, so it doesn't have to be decay resistant. That's a very common use for ponderosa pine lumber. Higher value uses, if you notice, there's knots in there, and that's tends to lower the value of many species. But if you've got good clear material, you see here what we call lineal moldings and things like doors and windows. These two are related. If you notice the components, the trim around this window is pine lineal moldings, casing in particular, and then all the window components themselves are made of ponderosa pine. And that is still one of the bigger uses for ponderosa pine, is what's called molding and millwork. And then things like wainscoting, this paneling here, and that for certain rustic appearances, knotty pine paneling is a pretty popular thing, and this is ponderosa pine paneling right here. One of the things that Chuck and I talked about here last week is something called, talk about how clever people can be with their marketing efforts. These ponderosa pine trees out in the desert are susceptible to what's called the mountain pine beetle. And the mountain pine beetle brings in a fungus as it bores into the trees, and then that fungus will then spread through the tree. And if it gets severe enough, it can kill the tree, something called blue stain fungus. Gives the wood a bit of a blue cast. And so some clever person came up with this idea of marketing it as denim pine. And so you can see here some ponderosa pine flooring with that blue stain fungus in it. Again, for a kind of a rustic log cabin application, or anywhere really, wall paneling as well. With all the pine beetle infestations across eastern Canada, in fact, eastern Oregon as well, down into California, fire-killed timber is often susceptible to this as well. There's going to be all kinds of blue stain pine on the market here pretty soon, and they're looking for bigger outlets for it than what we've got now. Just to kind of continue here a little bit, what are the product opportunities? Simpson Door Company up in just west of Tacoma. They have a wide range of door species. You can see here all the species you can choose from. This happens to be the ponderosa pine. So high-end millwork is a possibility with this species. If you notice, though, not a knot in sight there. So that's kind of a key feature for a high-end product usually. And then the one product, if you do your homework, you probably will not find listed anywhere, and that is hardwood plywood. Oregon happens to be a very dominant player in the hardwood plywood industry. There's 5 mills in Oregon alone that produce hardwood plywood. And this is decorative, non-structural plywood. So if you look there on the image, there's some oak, there's some cherry. That's actually called hardwood plywood, but the bottom one is Douglas fir, which is not a hardwood, a softwood. But the main idea here is this is decorative panels. Couple mills in Eugene, there's one in Klamath Falls. This Columbia Forest Products here is in Klamath Falls in Southern Oregon. I've mentioned this one again because this is probably one you're not going to find as you do your homework. The value of these panels is typically in the face veneer, of course, the very, very paper thin layer of oak or cherry or walnut or whatever it is that's on the panels that's going to go into your kitchen cabinets or your furniture in some way. But they often use core veneer as well of lower value species, or just where the appearance does not matter as much. Columbia Forest Products in Klamath Falls tends to use quite a bit of white fir, but they also use, at least they did years ago when I lived in Klamath Falls, they use ponderosa pine as well. And ponderosa pine makes a pretty decent core material for hardwood plywood, as I understand. So something to think about there. I will leave you with this thought right here. We do have on our website here our test results for the test we've done of the Willamette Valley ponderosa pine. And so I'm not going to stop and show you the details here. I'll show you the address for that in a second. But essentially, this talks about the species, the testing that we've done. And then again, if you scroll down the page, you find the tests we did of several different logs, color-coded here in the image, so we could keep them apart once we had the lumber sawn from them, and just kind of how the properties that we tested compare to ponderosa pine from the USDA Wood Handbook, which would be mostly Eastern Oregon or Northeast California ponderosa pine versus Willamette Valley, just to see how different it was or how similar. And so there's my contact information there, as well as the Wood Innovation Center page /valley-pine, if you want to check out the properties of the species that we've determined so far. And with that, I will turn it back to Chuck and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, that was a great presentation. Thanks a lot. I wish we could all clap, you know. That's one of the disadvantages of remote learning. I want to turn it over to questions, but before I do, I noticed that Dave Silent has joined the meeting, and I wanted to introduce him to the class, and I made him a co-host. And Dave, would you just spend just a little bit of time telling what your involvement is and how we got together? I think the students would be very interested in that.
Yes, I had the good fortune of going through the Dean of the College of Business. 3 professors later, I had an opportunity to meet with Chuck, and we are looking for a way to market our pre-commercial ponderosa pine logs from the Willamette Valley strain. And so all your efforts are much appreciated, and we're looking forward to what you come up with.
So what I want to do here is I will open it up if any students have any particular questions at this time, or general questions, that would be fine as well. The thing I want to point out at this stage is that this is a classic example of how marketers can take the lead in product development, in the sense that we're not focused on the details. I mean, Dave's group, the Willamette Valley Ponderosa Pine Association, has a problem right now because they have no market for their trees, any market for their thinning trees that they could make money on. So we have the technology from OSU and through Scott and this, we have the technology. So what our job is as marketing people is we need to go out and we need to establish a value proposition on a wood product that we can successfully sold, so that everybody in the whole supply chain can make money. And that's unique in the sense that generally wood has been thought of as a commodity, and it's been usually driven by the fact that the mill takes the risk on the wood. And so they're the ones that actually ended up marketing this thing, which is really not the way it should go, right? And this also brings up a perfect example of, we are not responsible for the technical nature of the wood, right? We're not responsible. So it's conceivable that one of the groups could come up with an idea that may end up being structurally something we can't figure out how to do. But that's not the purpose of this class. The purpose of this class is to create the value, justify the price, and present that in a way that people will enjoy it. And 99% of the time, though, we've got good enough engineers. If it's not quite the right strain, we can change it a little or move it on, or maybe someplace different. So that's not usually our problem. But so that I wanted to make sure that there was that, and that you got a chance to meet Dave, because Dave represents the Willamette Valley Ponderosa Pine Association, which are the guys that we're going to help out as a result of this class. So does anybody have any questions that they want to throw at the group? We'll open it up, and then we'll let these guys go, or they can stay if they want. And then we'll take attendance, and then we'll move on to the normal lecture.
I do see that there is a question about the fungus being introduced intentionally by humans, and yep, that can certainly be done. In fact, one of my coworkers, Sari Robinson, does that already with something called spalting. So if you've ever seen like a turned wood bowl or something, it's actually a fungus that creates these lines or streaks, dark lines around the wood. It's actually early stages of decay. But she's been working in this arena of introducing fungus into trees to give a broader scale than just small parts of the tree, get that spalting look in there. So I've actually talked with some people down in California about sometimes they get some really beautiful blue stain patterns in the wood, but it's unfortunately a bit unpredictable. And so to be able to control it is a great idea, to actually say, well, let's give it a star pattern, or let's give it a spiral pattern or something in the tree, rather than just taking what you get.
Are there other funguses that can produce different colors?
There are, yeah. In fact, Siri has been working on extracting the dyes from these fungi to be a natural textile dye, for example. So a lot of dyes, I guess, as she says, I don't know anything about textile dyes, but she said a lot of textile dyes for your jeans and the clothing you wear are actually fairly toxic chemicals.
Wow.
So she's looking to use fungi from all over the world, really. She travels all over the world to be a natural dye for clothing.
Is she your department?
She is. Yeah, I can share you. Just let me do a quick share here.
Yeah.
So if you want to look her up, where is she? Yeah, so there is, this is not her faculty website, obviously, but Northern Spalting, her website, Sari Robinson. Let's see if it shows any images on here. I'm not sure. Yeah, you can buy the fungi or buy the, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, her book, the book she wrote on the subject, I don't know how well you can see that there, but those zone lines on there, they call it where two fungi interact. Yeah.
Huh.
So she's just over in Richardson Hall where I am.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
You never know until you try, huh?
Yeah. She's actually probably one of the leading experts in the world on a very narrow topic like that. Spalting.
Huh. Okay, we'll let it up if anybody else has any questions. Otherwise, here's what I want to do. I don't want all the students, if you have a question for Scott, I would appreciate it, probably get it to me and I'll collect them. I don't want this class to barrage Scott with emails, but I can get you whatever answer you want real quickly as you guys process your products and your marketing plans. But having said that, I really I want to thank Scott for coming in. I really appreciate that. It actually is probably easier to get you this way than it would live, maybe. I don't know, but it really is. It really was helpful out, and I think this is gonna create some momentum in the program. So,
my pleasure. I'm glad to stick around, but if you're going to change topics dramatically, and I'll sign off then.